wait a minute. You're telling me that there is this ridiculous world famous virus lab right down the street from one of the most lethal, deadly pandemics in human history. And you're trying to say that it's just a coincidence that the virus started and originated in that same town? You gotta be kidding. This thing has to be true. It has to have. If it wasn't intentionally made in the lab, they had to have it stored in there and then it leaked out. Let's just get into one of the granddaddy COVID conspiracy theories of them all, that coronavirus was man-made in a lab in Wuhan, China, and intentionally released by the Chinese government as an act of biologic warfare. I'm ER Dr. Larry Burchett, MD. This is the COVID Weekly, powered by AvrPoint.com, where you can go to AvrPoint.com and check out all of our scientific evidence about how we're going to unpack and answer this question. Be sure to watch through the rest of this video. At the end of it, I'll give you the next conspiracy theory that we're going to attach. You can always reach out to me at Dr. Larry Burchett on social media. So let's talk about this idea that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan, China, specifically that it was intentionally made, like biologic warfare. Maybe it leaked out, and that's how this pandemic started. We know for sure that the first cases were in Wuhan, China. That was confirmed when they took samples. There were patients at the end of 2019 that had this pneumonia. They took samples, identified coronavirus. So it did start in that area. We also know that there is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a world-famous viral lab where they have tons of coronaviruses that they study. Many of them are taken from bats, as that's a reservoir of the virus. In fact, the Wuhan Institute of Technology is a biosafety level 4. That is the highest. It's like when they're all in hazmat suits and working with very dangerous biologic, viruses and other things. So the conspiracy theory goes, wait a minute. You're telling me that there is this ridiculous world famous virus lab right down the street from one of the most lethal, deadly pandemics in human history. And you're trying to say that it's just a coincidence that the virus started and originated in that same town? You gotta be kidding. This thing has to be true. It has to have. If it wasn't intentionally made in the lab, they had to have it stored in there and then it leaked out. Now, so this idea, I want to read this quote to you that came off of Facebook, okay? So it's not a crazy idea. Like, I don't think it's crazy to ask the question, wow, there's a virus lab down there and this thing started right down the street in this kind of live animal meat market. Like, that's not crazy to say, is there a connection with that? But here's how it goes crazy on Facebook. So one thing there's a bunch of things that kind of boosted this. And here's one of them. I'm going to read this Facebook post. It's attributed to the Japanese Nobel Prize winning scientist, Tasuko Hanjo. Okay, here's the whole thing. If it's natural, coronavirus, if it's natural, it wouldn't have adversely affected the entire world like this, because as per nature, temperature is different in different countries. That sounds fishy to me. I've done 40 years of research on animals and viruses. It's not natural, it's manufactured. It's manufactured, and the virus is completely artificial. I've worked for 4 years in the Wuhan lab in China. I'm fully acquainted with the staff of the lab. Oh, you got some insider information. I've been phoning them all after the coronavirus surfaced, but their phones are all dead for the last 3 months. It's now understood that all these lab technicians have died. First of all, that's not true. 3, it's kind of like funny that that's the evidence that it's true. Based on all my knowledge and research till date, I can say this with 100% confidence. That's not really how scientists speak. The coronavirus is not natural. It did not come from bats. China manufactured it. If what I'm saying is proven false now or even after my death, the government can withdraw my Nobel Prize. Dramatic. China is lying, and this truth will one day be revealed to everyone. Okay, so that went viral, fueled the fire. Now, listen to this thing by Trump. We're going to get into a minute into what science has to offer to answer this question. But I want to build up and kind of show that there is that it can be a little convincing, and that there are a lot of people out there that are using this let's say for political reasons. So Trump was asked in a press conference by someone that said, do you have, quote, a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of the virus? He says, yes, I have, referring to some, top secret information that he has. And then, of course, later in the press conference, he was unwilling to disclose any of that. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo similarly has said along these lines of the virus being manufactured in a lab in China. So maybe it makes sense. The president's saying, the Secretary of State is saying it, like we've got this Facebook thing. But how do we answer this question? How can we come to really answer this question and have any confidence in the answer? And the answer is science. The facts, the scientific facts, I'm going to lay them out for you and make an argument to debunk this conspiracy theory that, in fact, it really doesn't look like this virus came out of a lab in Wuhan, China. Let me start with, first of all, Tasuku Honjo came out and issued a statement. That's the Japanese Nobel Prize winning guy that the Facebook post was attributed to. Of course, the Facebook post was completely fabricated and nonsense. And he said, I'm greatly saddened that my name and that of Kyoto University have been used to spread false accusations and misinformation. And then he went on to say, like most people of goodwill, that this is a time where we have a common enemy, where the whole world is against the virus. We're not against each other, and that we should be collaborating to save as many people as possible. Fauci chimes in. When asked if it came out of a lab in China, Anthony Fauci, the most level-headed, reasonable source of facts and science throughout this whole pandemic. And he said, if you look at the evolution of the virus in bats and what's out there now, this could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated. Everything about the stepwise evolution over time strongly indicates that the virus evolved in nature and then jumped species. So Fauci said, no, it doesn't look like it's coming from a virus. It looks like it evolved in nature, and it went from another animal, bat, maybe it jumped to another animal, and then infected human beings. Now, I'm going to explain all of this in a second, because that's the key scientific explanation of where did coronavirus come from. And it's the alternate explanation to, well, it was cooked up in a lab. And there's a great article. We're going to go to this article in Nature from a Dr. Christian Anderson out of Scripps in San Diego. Goes into the nitty gritty about the genes, okay? And this is what's key to explaining away this conspiracy theory. So this article in Nature says, they looked at all the genes, okay, and they came to this conclusion. Our analyses clearly show that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. Now, I want to unpack this for you, because this is the key part of this thing, giving this scientific evidence, all right? So, first of all, there's a Dr. Shi at the Wuhan Institute of Virology who works with bats and coronaviruses. She has identified over 2,000 coronaviruses. In these articles, they talked about there are 7 that are known to infect humans. So out of thousands of coronaviruses, most of them just live in bats and don't affect or harm us. It does appear that they've identified 7 different coronaviruses. We know 3 of them, right? SARS in 2002-3 was a big deal, serious coronavirus. MERS, which was about a decade ago in the Middle East respiratory syndrome, that was also a coronavirus. And then now SARS-CoV-2, those 3 are the serious ones. And then there's 4 other coronaviruses that just kind of cause common colds and little stuff. But out of all of these viruses in that lab, with the study of bats and all this stuff, they had never had any virus that was like this one. They had never had any virus in that lab that matched the COVID-2 genes until they had isolated it. When in late 2019, people were getting pneumonia, they came in, they were getting tested, and then they identified the COVID virus. They sequenced the genome. We did all this testing on it. It didn't exist in there before that. Okay. So where did it come from? And I want to zoom in on this explanation of the genes. So we look at the genes and we compare the genetic code, which we've got the whole thing, which is crazy. Like, that's insane. We compare the genetic code of the 2002-3 coronavirus with the ones that we find in these bats with the current SARS-CoV-2 genes. And when you look them up, you see little differences. Now remember, so I'm going to jump into, so remember part of the structure of coronavirus. I think of it like this ball. It's got a protein sphere. On the inside is the RNA, which it uses to replicate in our genes. And then it has these spike proteins all around it. And the spike protein is what's used to attach into, you like my drawing, to attach into human cells. And this particular spike protein is much more effective than the one, because this is more contagious, this has gone pandemic, it was way worse. So, the first SARS coronavirus in 2002-3 killed 8,000 people. I think we're at like 1 million deaths already. And one of the key reasons why it's contagious is this spike protein. So they've been able to identify the genes, the genetic material that codes for that protein. And the differences between now, SARS-CoV-2, and 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, the difference between now, the genes that code for the spike protein now and the one 20 years ago. And okay, this is where I want you to look at this, look closely at this thing, okay? I'm gonna pull this thing up and describe it to you. So you see there's 3 lines. There's this blue line at the top. So coronavirus, the RNA of it is about 30,000 nucleotides long. And remember, that's like cytosine, guanine. It's the individual pieces of DNA, nucleotides, that make up the whole strand. That's the blueprint for proteins. Remember, DNA, it unzips, you get something that comes in and reads it and then builds with amino acids, comes in and builds proteins that then go off and do it. And so in this case, one of the proteins that the coronavirus RNA codes for is the spike protein. Makes sense? Like, how do you make the spike protein? This is the blueprint for that. And so that's the blue line in the top is the whole genome, 30,000 nucleotides. Awesome that we know that information. The red guy gets more specific. This pink one looks like it's about 1,300 nucleotides, individual, that codes for the spike protein. So that's the thing that you line it all up, and then they put these individual amino acids match up there, and that creates that spike protein. That actually creates the structure. That's literally how that is a blueprint. Now, you go to let's go down to the bottom thing. You can see these kind of multicolored nucleotides it looks like it's between 400 and 500, right? That's the number of it on there. And on this thing, so there's yellow and pink and all this stuff, and they kind of highlight 6 of them, okay? And this is the key part of this whole thing. I know I'm blabbing a lot, but this is the key part of the whole thing. If you look at the human, which is in the middle, the human SARS-CoV, that's the 2003 one, there's only one of these key 6 nucleotides that's the same as the current SARS-CoV-19. So it doesn't have 5 of them. So there have been 5 mutations since then, since that common ancestor regarding this spike protein, I'm sure there have been other mutations in other genes and other parts of it, but this is one of the key points as to why this thing has become more infectious and more deadly. And so when we look at that, we say, well, that took 6 steps. There were 6 individual, this is a terrible little, like 6 individual things that had to switch. Let me use my pen analogy. One time it was this, and then genetic mutation popped out a cytosine and it turned into a guanine, for example. And that ended up being part of why this spike protein became more virulent. It's random mutation that happens, but it had to happen in all 6. You can't do that in a lab. You can't pick out one nucleotide and put it in. A, you can't do that. And B, how would you know that little change is going to make the spike protein more? And then it happened in 6 different locations, as you can see on this spike protein, in a very key region. This receptor binding domain, it has a name, RBD, that determines how this thing attaches on there. Okay, so keep looking at this thing. So I want to go into this a little bit more. So they're comparing this sequence of 150 genes with SARS-CoV-2, with our current COVID, with the past one, and with the things that they found in various different bats. Okay. And then also with a coronavirus that they isolated from a pangolin, which is kind of like an aardvark. And when you compare them, you see, first of all, there's only one. The old SARS and the current COVID only have one of those 6 in common. Okay. But when you look at, for example, this old bat SARS, that one's got 3. And so that's evidence that the coronavirus evolved in bats. It had 3 of the mutations, but it didn't have all of them. That's the most common bat ancestor. So it's got, I think they said like 96%. Oh, we've identified the coronavirus. It's got most of the genes as our current coronavirus in bats, but it doesn't have all of them. So where did it happen? Well, they found it in this pangolin. So if you look at the pangolin, it has all 6. It shares all 6 of those genes that we see, these key genes for the S protein to infect. It's got all of them. That's the link. Now, it's not 100%, but it appears that the bat, part of the coronavirus evolved in the bat, and then they see this is the evidence that you see in this pangolin. I might even not be saying that right, pangolin. I don't even know what that is. In this pangolin, either it evolved in a bat and we haven't identified it yet, and then it infected the pangolin, or it could have just evolved in the virus could have through mutation evolved in this other animal reservoir, this other animal host, and then that one of those animals that was infected with this virus was at this, live market and was either slaughtered and it got on somebody, it was consumed, but one of those infectious animals then gave it to humans, and from there it went everywhere. But the key point of this whole thing that I want you to get across, and I don't know if I'm doing it very well, and it took me a while to figure this out, reading all this stuff. Each of those mutations happens randomly and in isolation. When it's a random mutation and it doesn't make the virus stronger, the virus isn't going to replicate, it's going to die off. But when it finally finds this random mutation that does spread, and then it goes everywhere because it's more infectious and contagious, and the virus lives on in that way, it truly goes viral, right? Funny, like this is what go viral means, but we really understand it to mean more of an internet sensation kind of thing. That is not possible to do in a lab. That's the key point, is when you look at this science, and there's other genetic and biochemical indicators in the same way that's like, this just isn't possible in a lab. And now, look, and so that's why you come to the conclusion that scientists all over the world are coming to the conclusion. They look at this and they go, yeah, no, it doesn't look like it came from a lab. That looks like through the process of natural selection and evolution, random chance and mutation, that each of these nucleotides changed. We've got, a little bit of a common cousin in this old bat. Looks like it either mutated in a bat or in this pangolin or some, animal in between, and then it gave it to us, and then boom, it goes from there. That's the story that the science and the evidence is telling. The rest of this stuff is nonsense conspiracy theories on Facebook that people just do, and it just does this for entertainment. There's politics involved, whether it be increasing tensions between the United States and China and withdrawing money from the World Health Organization. And to be clear, like China, let's not forget, the doctor in China that was the whistleblower to this, who was silenced. There are reasons to not trust China. That's all true. That's absolutely all true. We may not be aligned with the Chinese government on many things. It doesn't matter. The science tells us a different story. All that may or may not be, that's not the truth. Science is telling a different story. And the story that science is telling is that this was not cooked up in a lab. It was cooked up. It occurred naturally in nature. So if you're mad at anybody, you should be mad at Mother Nature, because this is just the process of selection that happens with viral replication. That was long-winded. I hope you got something out of that. I'm going to wrap it up with that. Read that Nature article. Check out this evidence for yourself at avropoint.com. What are we going to do next time? We're going to talk about the flu shot. Conspiracy theories about the flu shot, vaccines. We're going to get into it. It's going to be messy, but it's going to be great. Thank you for watching all the way through. Reach out to me on Dr. Larry Burchett on the social medias. As always, stay safe, stay sane, do your part. We'll see you next time.